probably for most of my life, Andrew, I haven't done a lot of sitting still. I would say my body and brain seem to naturally be wired for movement, and I usually feel good when I'm often moving outside, doing some sort of sport, or again with a natural wiring, moving towards a goal, an objective, whether that's work or academics or something. But I have learned here, as I get older and hopefully a little wiser, there's a huge value in slowing down and not moving. And hunting has become one of my favorite activities. And one of the reasons is it forces you to slow down and stop and just be still in nature for long periods of time. And that's been really valuable to just grow that side of me and of my experience. So yeah, more and more I like slowing down. I've realized as an athlete, as a coach, the value of rest and how important that is, especially for those of us who are getting older, which is true about everyone. But I can't recover like I did when I was in my 20s, and now I realized, if I want to get stronger, a lot of it is like more rest, and that's good.
That makes a ton of sense. I think one of the reasons this question is on my mind is I finally got to the point where I have a pretty cool garage gym, Travis, and I've been in there. I've been cranking it. I'm just coming back from COVID, so I've been pretty cautious with my aerobic activity. I've found that I'm very, very fatigued. My heart rate is way more elevated than normal for a given zone.
Yep.
So I thought, I'll do a bit more strength work. I also am an athlete like everyone. The older you get, your training has to change a little bit. And so I backed off the aerobic training, ramped up the strength training, and then I got tendonitis really bad in my elbow. And I'm like, okay, I really need to dial that back. I was having some challenges with my knees, it's kind of like the 10 man, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been thinking about, I certainly have not done endurance sports at the level that you have, but it's always been a part of my life. It's been an organizational principle. It's existentially, it's taught me a lot of things. When I was a kid, getting on a bike was always the vehicle for freedom. It took me so many places from a very young age, and it has continued to do so throughout my life. And I've thought a lot about what happens when we have to be still. And I get the feeling that, like you, I have a very high level of cognition. My brain's always kind of going. And part of how I find stillness is through movement.
Mm-hmm.
And when I sit still, it becomes a bit more challenging to manage that. And I don't love sitting still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And again, maybe I would say that's all very true for me. Again, per the natural wiring, but it's been nice to grow too, and embrace that and get it. I've never gotten way into like meditation, but I do some guided meditation here and there. I really like yoga. I love to start and end my day with. It's nothing too formal, and I don't have a refined practice, as they would say, but I know it helps my back feel better and helps me calm down a little bit. On the lifting, Andrew, and first of all, you got to give yourself some credit. I think you finished twice, second place at the what is now the Unbound and used to be Dirty Kansas, the 100-mile gravel race. So, that's pretty big time. But on the lifting side, I think you are the first person I've ever talked to who has pumped iron with AC Slater. Tell us about that, Mr. Vontz. I mean, does he what was it like? Did he call you preppy?
I think I'm about to blow your mind here because I have several Saved by the Bell connections.
Yes, please do tell us. If you have met Kelly Kapowski, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I will be excited.
I have not met Kelly Kapowski, but what I can share is, and I think what you're referencing, there was a moment in my life after I moved to Los Angeles. I was living at the time in I believe our rent was around $300 a month. So I might be dating myself a bit here. In a studio apartment with my girlfriend at the time. We also had several tortoises, so there was
Mm,
not a lot of room in the apartment.
mm,
And I started training at World Gym in Burbank. And a couple of interesting things happened there. I became a spin instructor, and I also was fired from my job as a spin instructor for my music selection. But in
mm.
addition to that, in the downstairs area where I would weight train, and at the time it was really classic like bodybuilding splits. You know, I would do like a bicep and chest day one day, and then
Yep.
do the tris and delts another day. But I was in there one time, and I think I was probably doing some curls, and lo and behold, who's next to me? I've got Mario Lopez is bench pressing, doing some dumbbell bench press
Yep.
next to me, and I do regret that I didn't ask him if he needed a spot,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yep.
that's how it goes. And then actually later, when I was living in Los Angeles, I joined a bike racing team, VeloWorks, which was a team, great team. The guy who put that team together was Eddie Monnier, who's a fantastic coach and did a lot of great things on the nonprofit side, getting more people involved in cycling. And one of my teammates was Zach from Saved by
No
the Bell.
way. No
Yeah,
way.
yeah, Mark Paul
Yeah.
Gosselaar,
Yeah.
and
Wow. I didn't
yeah,
know he
so
was a cyclist.
he was. Mark Paul got really deeply into cycling. I was there at the beginning of his journey, and in many ways, Travis, I like to think of myself as the wind beneath Mark Paul Gosselaar's wings as
Yeah.
a competitive cyclist.
Excellent.
Yeah, but we were racing at a pretty low level. If anybody's familiar with Legion of Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot of videos of the CBR, California Bicycle Racing
Mm.
crits. Those crits were huge at that time. I'm talking early 2000s. This is probably around 2003 to 2005, I think. And that was a super competitive scene. Lance was on the rise. People were really into road cycling, and criterium racing was like gravel racing is today.
Yeah.
And Mark Paul Gosselaar was on the team, and he was a very highly skilled athlete. He had a background, I believe, in motocross,
Mm.
and he was like Iceman, super super competitive guy, very
Yeah.
friendly, but when the flag dropped, it was on. And
Awesome.
yeah, so Mark Paul, I was in a couple of races where Mark Paul definitely podiumed. I don't recall if he won. And then I do recall one time, if anybody's done low level criterium racing, you make all these plans because everybody's very serious, even at a
Mm-hmm.
low level, about what are you going to do? Who's going to do the lead out? I mean, it's like putting kindergartners on ice skates when you've got a Cat 4 criterium going on,
Yeah.
and anything can happen. You just kind of need to go with the flow and
Yeah.
go for the win if the door opens in front of you. And we were in a situation where we were probably in, I don't know, I was like fourth wheel going into the last corner at a CBR, Dominguez Hills. If anybody's raced it, it's a right hand into an uphill long sprint to the finish. It's probably 350 or 400 yards. And there was a gap in front of me that opened up. Somebody slowed down who was at the very front. And as soon as that gap opened up, the plan was I was going to lead someone else out. I think Mark Paul was on my wheel, but I jumped as soon as the riders in front of me slowed down. I was like, I guess this is the moment in time when if I'm going to try to win, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah.
I came around the three riders in front of me, went through the turn, was drilling it as hard as I could, and almost made it to the finish line. Some other rider passed me, so I ended up getting second, which was a bummer, but I was still really excited about that result.
Yeah.
And Mark Paul's lead out didn't work out, so I didn't take him to the finish line. So
Yep.
I'd like to apologize, but not really, to Mark Paul. I still
Yeah.
feel good that I got second, and that's just bike racing, right?
Yeah.
So those are kind of my two brushes with Saved by the Bell in Los Angeles. And yeah, later Mark Paul went on to become a really serious CrossFit athlete, I think.
Mm.
And I know that, ironically, like I'm going to keep going on here. You've got me going,
Yeah.
and I believe
No, believe me,
he's
I am
now
interested.
Yeah, ironically, one of my buddies who was a very frequent training partner of mine and also was with me both times at the Unbound 100 when I got second place, who's my training partner and we raced together. He is a very high level Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. He's a brown belt now.
Mm,
And Mark Paul Gosselaar now trains at his gym. So
wow,
they roll together. Yeah.
man. This Andrew, this is all good information. I'm going to pass this on to my kids because I've been so there's a you may I'm sure you already know this. There is a like redone Saved by the Bell where
Yeah.
Mark plays, he's like taken on I think Mr. Belding's role. So like,
Okay.
Zach Morris, aka Mark Paul is now the principal at
Right.
Bayside High. So um and I do believe AC Slater he's the football coach, I think. So yeah, it's something to check out
That's
next time you're sitting on the trainer.
yeah, perhaps that could be one of the more interesting ways to spend the time on the trainer versus staring at
Yeah.
drywall, for example. So, Travis, I wanted to go back to something you shared. I'm really interested in when people are trying something new. So, you said you've gotten into hunting. How long ago did you get into hunting?
Probably I don't know 6 or 7 years ago now. So I was well into adulthood and hadn't hunted growing up or anything.
What drew you to hunting? Why were you interested in trying it?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of it is just the outdoors. Back to the sitting still thing, I seem to I don't know if I'd say have trouble, but just kind of my style is moving from pursuit to pursuit. Really get into running, or then really get into cycling, or adventure racing was a good fit because you simultaneously do a bunch of different sports. But I was just kind of at a point where, especially at that time, ultra running had gone a little bit too far, maybe into the achievement orientation, and was less of like the reason that I wanted to run. But anyway, just found myself, kind of both looking for something else and then all of a sudden drawn to something else. And it sort of started with like a friend of mine was going out to had an elk tag and said, hey, you want to come out, and if we get one it'll be really helpful to have you around to carry it out. And we went out there and we didn't end up harvesting an elk, but it was a great experience. It was an adventure. There were elk bugling all over, which I love. And I had grown up in Evergreen, Colorado, which is like elk headquarters. I mean, all year long, the cows and calves are literally right in town. And then in September, the bulls come out of the mountains and they're in town. So they're bugling and battling and everything. And I started thinking like, how hard could it be to go out in the woods and find an elk and harvest it? And it turns out it's actually really really hard because they behave much differently when they're a place where they know they can be hunted. So anyway, I just had some of those experiences, and then harness sort of a beginner mindset where you get to learn a lot and progress a lot. And in this case, hunting for me, there's a lot of different ways to go hunting, but for me, it's this great combination of sort of all of the things that I've done outside with fitness and gear and taking care of yourself, moving fast at times or slowing down, reading maps, which I love, but also this whole other intellectual side of animal behavior and ecology, and how does the wind work, and what are the factors with sun and snow and weather and different times of year. So it's just it's really engaging on many levels.
And has hunting animals shifted your perception of your experience as a human being at all, or your understanding of what it means to be human?
I don't know if I'd say profoundly. I've always loved animals. As a kid, I had tons of pets. and some people might be thinking, boy, that's kind of ironic. You go out and you try to kill an animal and you're saying you love them. I mean, for me, both of those things are true. I have dogs. I love my dogs. I run and bike and ski with them all the time. I've gotten into pack burro racing where you run with a donkey and really enjoy that. Um, but yeah, now that I think of it, I would say it's I don't know if the hunting has changed my view of what it means to be human, but it has um, meshed with my developing view of what it means to be human. When I read a book like I think it's called *Sapiens: The Brief History of Humankind* or something like that, or there's another one called *The Dawn of Everything*, and these kind of these sort of massive histories, more or less. The story I get from them is like humans have been around for something like 200,000 years, and that means our modern day calendar that's 2,000 years old. That's 1% of the history of humankind, and probably for 190,000 years we were in small bands roaming around, foraging, hunting, living off the land, moving a whole lot, etc. And basically, our brains and bodies are what developed to do that. Now we're spending a lot of time doing things like a video call here, which we didn't actually evolve to do. So, anyway, do I think hunting, whether it's the process of hunting or getting your own food or taking the life of an animal in a very sad and heavy and responsible way, do I think that's part of the innate human experience? Absolutely. I think that's a lot more innately human than going to the grocery store and buying, some beef or chicken, and you don't think about where did that animal live? How did it die? How much energy went into raising that animal and getting the meat to wherever you are? If I drive 20 minutes from my house and hike up a mountain and freeze my ass off, and at the end of it harvest an elk, I know all of those steps of the process, and I think it's more ethical than big agriculture, or things like burning or mowing down rainforest in the Amazon to make room for cows and pigs or for the food. Uh, so yeah, anyway, I could go on and on, but yeah, I do. For me currently, it meshes with what it innately means to be human, and I fully respect other people might say, oh, plant based eating, or uh, you know whatever. If that fits with your view, then do it.
Yeah, and Travis, I'd love to talk about something else that's not a first for you. So you have your new book, A Mile at a Time. Thank you for sending me this advanced copy. I've really enjoyed reading it and
No,
getting to
thanks.
know even more about you, your dad, your family, your relationship. It's a very moving book. And before we get into kind of the subject matter, when you have a tremendous depth of experience as a speaker, as a writer, now as a podcaster, what is it like for you when you sit down for a big new project like this book? How do you approach it? And even though you've done a ton of writing before, how do you feel at the outset of a big endeavor like that?
I think it's still intimidating. It's daunting. I've only done uh, two books, so it's not like I've done it a lot. But you learn, and maybe less. There's less uncertainty than the first time, just because you know the process more as far as how do things work with an agent and a publisher and the marketing process. So there's a bit more of a sense of knowing what to do, but there's still a lot of unknown of how long is it going to take, and the like books, at least in my world, it takes a long time to you spend forever on this proposal and you think it's awesome, and then the agent puts it out, and it takes typically a while to get a publisher, and then you're actually into the drafting, and that takes a long time, and so in a nutshell, it's a combination of just trusting that things will work out, being okay with setbacks, which there always are, And then mainly, back to athletics, most times that people get good at something or do well is they just put time into it day after day. And that's true with writing or weightlifting or cyclocross or, podcasting, whatever you want to do. Like you got to put in the time and do it consistently. And that's usually how it comes together.
This is another topic I've explored with a number of guests recently, and I've really been thinking about, and I'd love to hear your take on it, Travis, which is when you've spent your life doing one activity or similar activities that are really hard. And for you, you've done so many things in the endurance sports space. It would probably take actually over 5 minutes to talk about a small amount of them and all the achievements that you've had. And as you do a lot of hard things in one space, you can become accustomed to the specific set of challenges that arise with that type of thing. I've been thinking a lot about,
Yep.
is there actually a high degree of transferability between like doing something really hard, for example, in the endurance sports or ultra endurance sports space versus you wake up and something goes wrong with your boiler, your water heater
Yeah.
goes out,
Yep.
something happens at work that you would prefer didn't happen, something
Yeah.
happens with your family. Having spent a lot of time in these spaces and having interviewed a lot of people yourself, what are your observations about that transferability or not?
Yeah, yeah. That's funny, Andrew, because I wrote down the same question. I basically put down like when it comes to performance in business, sports, and family, which strategies and tools overlap and which ones don't. So it's basically the same question, and it's interesting that you're exploring that because I think you do business consulting, you do leadership consulting, you've been an athlete, you've been in business, very high level at Strava and TRX and other things. Um, so my I guess my answer, again, it's not a simple one, but it's yes and no. So some things do, I would say I alluded to before, the idea of just consistent work day after day. I think that's important in your parenting, in your marriage, and in your business, just like it is on the bike or, running or whatever. I think teamwork is a general principle that carries across all of these things. And teamwork to me means that, is there a mission, a goal that people are united behind? And is everyone on the team ready to lead at times, but also to ask for help at times, and to to fall into their best role for the good of the team? I think that's true in any situation. Um, that said, does it all carry across? No. You talk about like the boiler breaking, or for me it's like the my garage is this shack that's been pieced to, the house is 100 years old. I don't know how the garage was built in pieces basically since then. This thing could fall down if the wind blows too hard. But I actively recognize that keeping my garage like clean and functional and not falling apart is really hard for me. For me, it's like, oh, there's my bike, there's my skis. I'm going to get out on these things and have fun, and it feels good. And some people would say, like, oh, you're going out in the freezing cold, to ski uphill right now. Like, that's not easy. Well, for me, it's a lot easier to go do that than to break my routine and organize a garage, which for me is very overwhelming. So, um, I guess the point is it doesn't. I don't think it all transfers. Well, how about you? What do you think? And is that something that you said you've talked about with guests when you do your business leadership and consulting? Are you kind of pulling some principles across, or maybe also telling them, oh, this works on the bike, but it's not going to work here?
Yeah, I think that what you said about being focused on making incremental progress every day on things you want to get better at, that's spot on. And I think it is something that is very easy to forget when you are new at something. I think you talked about having that beginner's mindset, which is critical when you're approaching any new endeavor. And I think it's doubly important when you actually think you have deep expertise in an area, because when you stay in that beginner's state of mind, that's when you actually can have breakthroughs. that's when you can observe things that you might just ignore otherwise when you're on autopilot. So trying to stay in a state of active consciousness, I think, is really critical. And for me personally, like one of the things I've been working on recently is I want to improve my guitar playing. And I've been
Mm,
playing guitar for almost 35 years at this point. Travis, I'd say my playing plateaued probably 24 years ago. And,
mm.
and like since then, I've picked up the guitar, I've strummed it. I spent a lot of time producing electronic music in the early 2000s, which I really enjoyed. I hadn't spent a lot of time trying to actually improve it playing my guitar. I have a friend, Kendrick, here in Hope, Maine, where I live, and he's a master woodworker and he's a former session musician. He came over to jam with me and it was fun, but I also had this experience of I would like to play with Kendrick more, and I'm not on Kendrick's level. Like maybe some
Mhm.
part of me thought, like, yeah, I can jam with Kendrick.
Mm.
Another part of me recognized, wow, I have a lot of work to do if I want to be able to actually execute when I play guitar at the level in my imagination. I think I'm much better than I am in real life. So I had
Mhm.
to acknowledge, okay, there's this delta between where I would like to be in this hobby of mine and where I'm actually at. And if I want to get better at it, then I have to put in real practice that's also enjoyable. So trying to find what are methodologies that I actually enjoy where I can acquire new skills and not being overwhelmed by the totality of the goal.
Yep.
So, it's picking up the guitar. I dusted off. I mean, yeah, I've got some old books here, everything about guitar
All
scales, a
right.
number of
Excellent.
a number of other
Yeah.
music theory things handy, and it's like, okay, so it's figuring out how can I spend some time doing that, and it also I've had to reallocate my time. So
Mm.
it's like, oh, maybe I'm gonna ride my bike for 30 minutes less today, or maybe I'm not going to go on that walk or do that yoga session or whatever. Because the reality is you can't do everything. So you kind of have to limit the number of things you want to do. You have to be very purposeful in how you approach doing them. You have to be
Yep.
strategic about it. And then you have to actually do the work and you have to accept this is going to be frustrating.
Mm. Mhm.
So I think greeting the frustration and knowing that feeling will probably be there at the outset, and then reminding yourself this is just something new things are different, you're going to have to become accustomed to them. And it's hard for me to remember, actually it's not that hard for me to remember. I remember when I was a young person and I got into cycling, which I didn't have any particular natural talent for. I didn't have exceptional ability. I remember it was just unimaginable to me that somebody could like go ride their bike for 50 miles or 100 miles. And
Mm.
it took years and years and years for me personally before that became something that I mentally believed I could achieve and then that I could go out and do.
Yeah.
And if I had to today, I'm not. I haven't been riding a ton. Like I said, I just had COVID. But if I had to, I have 100% confidence I could walk out the door today and go ride my bike 100 miles, like no question about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the perspective, the experience, and back to that beginner's mindset. One thing I love about that sort of view that I think is really important at any level is the role of fun and play. And I think about even at the highest level, if you look at the world tour cyclists, um, improvement is so hard once you're at that level. Those guys are now doing an extra 10, 20 hours a week of whether it's training or recovery or nutrition, all this stuff to try to get an improvement of 1 or 2%, because that's all it is. But I as I connect it to my own sports fandom, like right now is cyclocross season, and you got athletes like Pidcock and Wout Van Aert and Vanderpool, and these guys are the best of the best on roads, mountain bikes, and cyclocross. And I wonder if maybe one of the things that makes them so good is they're having some fun and variety. They go out in the cyclocross and it seems like they're having fun. They're at least getting to do uh, something different, and I think that's fun is huge, and that's probably a big motivator for you as you talk about your guitar stuff. I mean, reading the music theory book, that may not be super fun, but I'm sure it's fun once you're jamming with your buddy.
Yeah, bizarrely, I do really enjoy just reading through books of guitar
Okay,
scales and
well,
playing
maybe
them.
it
Yeah,
is.
but I mean, I rediscovered that when I picked these books up again and started playing. But I agree with you. Fun and novelty are a critical part of skill acquisition, of learning, of retention. And to use that example of Tom Pidcock, Matthew Vanderpool, Wout Van Aert. I co-host another podcast besides Choose the Hard Way. It's
Yep.
called Beyond the Peloton with
I've
Spencer
I've
Martin.
I've listened to it a bunch,
Oh,
and
awesome!
I hear I get the during the tour and the Grand Tour, Spencer and Johan are doing the what do
Yeah,
they call it, the predictions or whatever.
right.
I'm not into the betting, but I love to, like, every night I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, what are these guys going to say? And,
yeah,
and they
absolutely.
are it's amazing how well they do on those predictions.
Yeah, it's one of the things that Spencer is great at, and I just love getting to work on that show with him. And we were talking in the episode we dropped today about this very thing.
Mm,
Wout, Pidcock, and Matthew Vanderpool, and going back to this idea of if you want to be great at something, and that's going to mean shutting the door on some other things. So I would
yes,
say for
whether it's
Pidcock,
cleaning your
for Wout,
garage
and for
or yeah.
Matthew, yeah, or for those guys, I would say, Pidcock and Wout probably both have the shot at being tour winners, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have to make this decision. They also both could be cyclocross world champions. So in the
Yeah.
next
Yep.
6 weeks, if they haven't already, they're going to have to make this decision of, okay, how important is having the rainbow jersey in cyclocross to me? Is it more important than potentially winning a classic? For Pidcock, it might be Amstel Gold. For Wout, it might be Paris-Roubaix. And for Matthew Vanderpool, I think coming off of his ride at World Championships and the kind of horrible incident that happened there for him,
Yep.
I think at this point he really wants to do something to salvage what's been a season that went totally sideways with a lot of drama and reputational damage. So I think he's all in. But like, I look at his face when he competes, and you can't always tell something from looking at someone's face on television, but in his face, I see someone whose spirit is different than it was 6 months ago before he had his incident at the World Championships.
Mm-hmm.
And I also see hunger, and I think he really wants that rainbow jersey.
Yeah. 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 You're right. I mean, we live in a culture that encourages us to have your cake and eat it too. And I think that's something that a lot of us strive for in many ways, even for the listener. Maybe you're like, I want to crush it in business, I want to crush it as an athlete, and crush it as a mom or dad. Yes, and what's gonna give is it for some folks that might even come down to sleep, right? You're going super full speed on all these things, and pretty soon the average sleep is 4 or 5 hours a night. Are there consequences? Maybe so, maybe not. I know, looking at my dad's Alzheimer's journey, cognitive decline can absolutely be connected to not getting enough sleep, especially consistently over time. So yeah, hopefully people are making decisions just with those consequences in mind. And I would imagine those guys, the athletes at that level, with things so scientific, they know, okay, what does it take to be so good at a certain time of the year? Or like for Pidcock, he's a smaller guy. If he wanted to have a little more power to get off the line in cyclocross, what would that mean, being bigger and heavier? But that wouldn't be as good for a Grand Tour. So yeah, it's hard to have it all. I mean, you watch Wout in the Tour and it's like, wow, that guy kind of does do everything.
Yeah, and Travis, you have this entire book is about this journey that you've been on with your dad and your relationship, and I mean, it's subtitled A Father and Son's Inspiring Alzheimer's Journey of Love, Adventure, and Hope. And for you, having written this book, having been on this adventure, doing the podcast, and your dad's involvement in it, how do you think about your relationship with your father and the journey that he's on now? How do you remain in a positive frame of mind about it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, Andrew. I mean, how do you remain positive in the face of something that is not what you would have hoped for? You know, watching someone you love slowly lose capabilities that are physical, cognitive, everything. It's really really hard, and I'm learning more and more, again, back to I think I'm kind of wired naturally for like the black and white thinking, all in or all out, right? You're either 300% into the, cycling training or whatever you're running, whatever it is, or you're like totally off the boat. I like to think, hopefully some wisdom is like, well, there's nuance, there's gray areas, right? It can be possible that something is really bad and hard, and simultaneously there still is good, uh, just solid goodness, bright spots, and that is still there. And my dad has that. He's shown me through example that you can still find the good. I mean, he's having fun with his grandkids, and he and I have fun when we can get out and trek along together. And does that look a lot different than it did 10 years ago, or even 3 years ago when we did the eco challenge in Fiji? Yeah, it looks a lot different now. But I kind of, one of the things I tell myself is let's keep going as fast as we can and as slow as we must, which again are opposing views. But if you can do both, hopefully you can find that optimism, and also recognize. I tried to do this in the book, recognizing the sadness, because if you don't do that, if you just try to lock it away, I think the psychologists would tell us that's probably going to have ramifications down the road.
And when you think about your day today and what you've learned from the journey you've been on with your father, are there any decisions that you make now that are different than decisions you might have made before the
Mm-hmm.
Alzheimer's diagnosis and your consciousness of this journey? Does it change how you approach your life day to day and how you spend your time, the decisions you make?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it has big things happen, and they're going to impact us one way or another. So I think it's good to think through those. Writing it down in the book is that's been cathartic and helpful for me with processing. On the nuts and bolts, one takeaway I already mentioned was sleep. Just being more consistent with wake time, sleep hygiene. Podcast listeners know all about that because it's on all the podcasts, but it really is super important. Also, thinking a bit more about nutrition and, what am I eating? Where's the food coming from? For me, hunting and trying to get some more local fruits and vegetables if and when possible. Those kind of things. And then there's, the more philosophical side. I mean, I think one silver lining with Alzheimer's is it forces you to be present. For a person with cognitive decline of this type, like, it's really hard to remember what'd you do yesterday, what are you doing tomorrow. There's anxiety about what's coming up. Okay, like, oh, I'm really looking forward to Christmas, but when is Christmas? Is it tomorrow, is it a few weeks away? Those kind of things. But if we can stay present and just focus on what's going on here and now, that's huge. And dad, and really my mom as well, who's his primary caretaker, they keep showing me that. And even my wife was reminding me of it this morning as we were talking through, just future hypotheticals, right? What's going to happen? When is it going to happen? You don't know. And yes, it's responsible to plan ahead for, the move, or, this possibility or that possibility. but I think, I'd like to have 90% of my energy and thought process is on the current. What's happening now? How can we make this as good as possible? How can we maximize, like I said, time with the grandkids, or, you know, uh, uh, adventures that are, appropriate to the current level, and not worry too much about the future. Um,
And do you find it at this point, are you capable of staying in that centered positive frame, or does distraction or potentially negativity ever creep in? And if it does, how do you get recentered?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, am I capable? Yes. Or am I better than I used to be, or better than at the beginning? Those first few months after diagnosis, I talk about it in the book, but it was really, really hard. I mean, it was dark, it was panic, it was, you know, anxiety attacks, all of that. Generally, I'm uh, doing better, and a lot of that is through specific skills that I've learned from reading and talking, and ongoing work with therapists, and even trying out some psychedelic type plant medicine journey sort of stuff. So um, yes, I've improved, but is it like perfect? Is it I can see the negativity or the anxiety coming, and I just shut it off? Definitely not. You know, I'm at the point where okay, I see it coming. It's becoming a little stronger. But can I just push out the off button? No, that's life. Like, no one's perfect. And I had a pretty, I had a pretty low day last week on Friday, and who knows why, what the timing, what it was, but it was a lower day in the department of my dad has Alzheimer's. But I've learned to accept that that's going to happen. It's going to keep happening. It's going to keep being hard, and I have tools, and I'm not alone. I called my buddy Cole, whose mom recently passed away from Alzheimer's, and we talked for 10 minutes, and it was helpful. It didn't like solve anything, but it was a reminder that I don't have to be alone in this thing.
How has your sense of what you want to achieve in your life and whatever time you have left in your life and what's important shifted in the past couple of years, or has it remained the same?
Um, Man, these are good deep questions here, Andrew. Yeah, no, it has changed, and some of that, whether you can never pinpoint, okay, I'm changing in this way, and it's because of this or that or whatever. Obviously, this Alzheimer's thing has been a big piece. I Back to the busy brain. Like, I like reading. I like audiobooks. One of them that came across my attention that helped me a lot is called Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life. And it's based on mostly the psychologist Carl Jung's practices. And again, I don't claim to be an expert here or anything, and I can't even remember the author's name, but listeners can look it up. And it's wordy, it's long, but it's been helpful to me. And one of Jung's ideas was that for many people, at some point, there's kind of a shift to this sort of second half of life, whereby the first half has maybe been a little bit more focused on the ego and establishing oneself, and sort of, how do I look to others, etc. And not in a bad way or anything, but for me, a lot of that, like as an athlete, would have been this. A big piece of my identity was either, standing on the podium, or probably even more so, because that like doesn't always happen, but like driving for the podium. Like, I am aiming, this is what I'm doing, this is a big part of who I am. And then I've kind of tried to embrace that maybe this sort of second half of life, which currently to me feels pretty good, is like, I don't have to, I don't have to worry about that stuff as much anymore. And I can focus more on like the impact, on making a difference. And does that mean helping other people hit the podium? Does it, hopefully, more importantly, mean maybe here's a book that can help other families navigating the Alzheimer's journey, or something else hard? So that's kind of, That's one way I've thought about it. But who knows? Things will keep changing. I do feel like I've done a better job of embracing just life as a journey, and things will change, whether it's my interests or views or spirituality. So yeah, those are some of the impacts. What about you? Have you any I don't know, shifts for you, whether that's through parenting or from going from you were at Strava for a long time, like it's started as a smaller company, now it's probably a reasonably big company, at least in this space, and I think now you're doing more self-employment sort of stuff. How have things changed for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's a cliche, I guess, but in everyone's life, the only constant is change.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I was thinking about as you were talking is, and I think this also goes back to the question that I asked you around what happens when you sit still. Because for me, like I said, my brain's always, it never stops thinking. I have high cognition, what a lot of people would probably call ADHD. And like that has its advantages that you can exploit, and it also has times when it's challenging. And also, I have a tendency that I am aware of to just keep working harder and harder and harder when the move is actually to hit pause, to step away from something
Yep.
and to not think about it anymore. And I've learned this about myself over the years in different contexts. And the journey that I've been on in my career has really been about my curiosity about people, places, and things at the limits of human experience. And initially, I wanted to explore that through writing fiction. And I went and got an MFA in creative writing. While I was doing that, I started freelancing. The first publication I ever freelanced for was Vice, when it was not a giant streaming and online media conglomerate. It was a tabloid, a printed tabloid that you could get at like your local music store.
Mm,
And, I kind of just did that because I was like, okay, this is a way to tell stories and get paid to do it.
mm,
So I started doing that when I was in graduate school. I love bikes, and I was living in LA at the time, and that happened to be where a lot of cycling publications were headquartered. So I thought, oh, you know what, this will be a way to make money while I work to become a famous novelist. And I still may become a famous novelist. I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah, man. You
Yeah,
got a lot of time.
it
Yeah.
still could happen. But I got a really high profile agent right out of graduate school when I was quite young. I had a lot of interest. The guy who was the agent for Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club, called me up, was interested in signing me.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever, I signed with a high profile agent. My book didn't get picked up.
Mm,
And that was kind of one of the first times in my career where I was like, okay, now what? And then I decided to pursue freelance writing. I worked at a bike magazine for a short period of time, and my curiosity just took me in other directions. I loved writing about cycling. I found it to be really interesting, and there were just a lot of other things I wanted to explore. So I did that for about a decade, and I ended up writing for dozens of publications: Rolling Stone, Outside, the Los Angeles Times, Spin, all the cycling outlets, many other publications. I eventually met a former um, Navy SEAL, Randy Hetrick, and he had invented this product called the TRX. And I met him and did this workout with him. I was like, what is this thing?
mm-hmm.
He showed me what this thing was, and content marketing was just becoming a thing at that time. That was around 2006. So
Mm,
eventually, like circa 2010ish, he got me to leave my job and go to work for him. That was a big, scary leap. I I had never gone into a building for work in my entire life. I think I was
mm,
34. I remember just being like, I'd never, I had just freelanced. It's like, wow, this is weird. I have a boss now. I had to think about all these things I never thought about. Yeah. And then eventually I went to Strava. I was on the executive team there, and it's an incredible company. I love the product. and I helped to grow the community from 7 million to 100 million athletes, helped shift it from having some challenges, candidly, with its subscription product to really turning things around. And, I think we built a subscription that athletes really loved and were
Yeah.
happy to pay for. And we helped the business reach profitability during my time on the executive team and had years of record growth. And then I decided I was ready to do something new. I'd been doing this podcast for a couple of years. I wanted to go deeper. My curiosity was pulling me in a new direction. So I went all in on building Choose the Hard Way. And that was definitely scary because I loved what I was doing. It's a great company. It was a great job. And life is short. I had one of my really close friends die unexpectedly not long before I made that decision. He had finished, I think, 18 Ironmans,
Oh,
an
man.
incredibly accomplished athlete, had a rare genetic condition, had a stroke, and died. It was during the pandemic. I had moved to
Yeah.
Maine. He
Wow.
was in the Bay Area. I found out about his death on Facebook. And, you know, I'm sure it's an experience anyone listening to this can relate to. You probably had someone close to you die.
Yep.
But yeah, it's my friend Aaron Burby. He's an incredible person. I still miss him every day. And his death and who he was as a person, he was somebody who always pushed me. I remember shortly before he died, we were both trying to lose weight. And, I have two young kids now. I did at the time, and I had kind of put on a little bit of dad weight. And I wanted to, even though I wasn't really competing, I wanted to get faster. And he really pushed me. And when I would make excuses, he would just push back and say, hey, because I think I dropped 12 or 15 pounds. I wanted to drop a few more. I was like, yeah, I don't think I can do it. I'm doing everything I can. He's like, I don't think you're doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, yeah, actually, here's what I think you can do. I was like, no, when you're not getting sleep, your body has a high level of cortisol. And he's like, no, that's not what's going on. You're just you're not doing what you have to do to make this happen, and you're making excuses. He was totally right. And
Yeah.
him pushing me got me to do it. And, I, this might sound strange to people listening. It might sound like unusual behavior. To me, it was very healthy. And that's actually what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm sharing that, and I'm sharing what I shared about the different phases of my career because I have always taken risks, I think. I've taken big leaps, and I don't always have certainty about what's going to happen when I do that. And I really try to pay attention to my gut and my intuition and
Mm.
what the reaction is in my body to emotionally what's happening around me,
Yep.
which honestly, Travis, I used to just think was a bunch of BS. I used to think oh, whatever, you can just tune that stuff out and use sheer willpower and force. And it's
Yep.
no, the Body Knows the Score is one of my favorite books about
Yes.
trauma. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you've ever read it,
I have. It's a
but
great book. Yep.
yeah, it is a great book. Everybody has trauma, whoever you are, wherever you are in life. I have my traumas that I've dealt with, and reading that book and kind of doing a deep investigation of the relationship between the body, the mind, psychology, trauma has helped me to have a deeper understanding of myself, what motivates me, and maybe where I need to spend more time being gentle and healing.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's kind of what's moved me in these different directions. And it's interesting. I haven't really talked about this much on my podcast, but I guess I'll talk about it now because just as is the case with everything else with my podcast, I want my podcast to reach as many people as possible. I want my podcast to be great. And that's an ongoing process. And I've talked about another book on my podcast recently, which also is sitting somewhere around me in a pile, but Ray Dalio's Principles. And,
Mm.
Ray Dalio has a lot of really powerful ideas. I believe in systems level thinking and
Yep.
principles based thinking. And that's something that I apply to everything I'm working on. a business idea with someone now outside of the podcast, which has been really exciting. And again, that's something new and different to me. And whether I'm working on that, I'm working on my podcast, whether I'm advising organizations like a Second You Foundation, just started by my friend Hector Guadalupe, and helps people coming home from prison start careers in health and wellness, which I'm really passionate about, or working with Juro, which is a climate fintech app. Whatever space I'm working in, I want to be helping and empowering people at scale, and I want to help people to reach beyond what they believe is possible and to become who they can truly be, just this maximum version of themselves. And so that's what I'm all about. And that's kind of what I've been pursuing, which is a very, very
Yeah.
long answer to your question.
No, it's good stuff. I like it all. I'm really sorry about the loss of your friend Andrew. And when you talked about him and his memories, your face lit up, which is great, and it makes me think of a friend I lost in the pandemic, Emma Roca, who's a adventure racer and an ultra runner, and she was one of my first podcast guests a few months before she ended up passing from cancer. And you're right, those things they make you look at your own life. My question to you is, what do you think about the idea of a relationship with a person or their spirit after they've passed on? Is there still a way, if we think literally, he's not giving you the training encouragement anymore, but can that still exist? Is that something you're tapping into?
Yeah, Travis, and I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry that you experienced that during the pandemic as well, because I don't know what your experience was of how that impacted your grieving, your ability to connect with the family, but the pandemic
Yeah,
complicated.
it was really
Oh,
hard. Yeah, I mean, she lived in
yeah,
in Spain, and I tried
yeah,
at the last minute, like, can I get over there? And I couldn't, and I still haven't. I think I'm gonna finally get to see her husband David, like, next month. Um,
good. I'm glad to hear that you're going to be able
yeah,
to connect with her husband, and I think that, yeah, I hope that you're able to do that. It's yeah, I think in terms of my relationship with Aaron since he died, um, it's been, I mean, it's been tough. I still haven't actually been able to connect with the community of people that were other parts of his friend constellation. I mean, that's one of the interesting and kind of challenging things about this time. I've moved all the way. My family moved to Hope, Maine. I'd been living in the Bay Area. I've been in California 25 years. Aaron's mother and stepfather are in the Vashon, Washington area,
hmm
and his brother's in another location. But yeah, I haven't actually been able to spend time with them. I hope to do that in the future. And then in terms of my relationship with Aaron now that he's gone, yeah, actually, it's something I think about all the time. I
hmm
think about it all the time, and anytime something comes up that's hard, there's that voice. I think about, the guy, whether we were out on a bike ride or, it was something in my career. Aaron was an inspiration to me professionally. He came from a much more, just like corporate background, and like always knew all the right moves, and, would always push me in that regard as well. So when tough things would come up, whether it was then or now, I'd kind of think, what would Aaron do? And having that voice is one of the ways in which I stay connected to him. And beyond that, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I did just once since he died. He showed up in a dream,
mm
and um, yeah, it was really intense, and there was I had some challenges going on at that time, and sorry, man.
It's okay. It's absolutely
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, but yeah, he just showed up and told me it was going to be okay, and it was like it was real. It was really, yeah. So I'd never thought about being connected to someone who was dead in that way,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was real.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Andrew. I,
Yeah,
I, and yeah, and who are we to say that that it's not real? Because, um,
right.
you know, I'm glad that he can help you in that way.
Yeah, and what about you, Travis?
Yeah.
What has your relationship been like?
Yeah. I think of Emma every single day when I look up here in the Sawatch Mountains just outside Salida. There's a snow formation called the Angel of Chavano. That kind of when the snow is right, it looks like an angel, and I've kind of set that as like, that's how I think of Emma. And usually it's happy, and I'm riding my bike along, and I'm looking up there, and just kind of like you said, feeling her spirit, her energy. Um, but it's not always happy. It's thinking of uh, you know everything that she's missing, like especially with her kids growing up. Yeah, it's sad. It's hard. Life's not fair.
Yeah, life's not fair, and I think that's another really important lesson. And I mean, you either learn it or life shoves your face in it.
Yeah.
And whether it's losing a friend or something happening with a romantic partner, a relationship, your kids, your job, it's going to happen,
Yep.
right? It's an inevitability. And for me, that's just one of the lessons that I don't particularly think of my podcast as a, hey, here are 3 things you can go do after you listen to this podcast today.
Yeah.
Sometimes those things pop up, but and again, I've been reflecting on this a lot as I'm continually thinking about, like, what am I actually doing? Why am I doing this? And
Mm-hmm.
where is it headed? For me, part of it is getting to connect with people like you who have a very high level of achievement and also have this common denominator of whenever you step into something new, you are a beginner and you face the same challenges as everything else. And I think there's something powerful about getting to hear those stories. I know for me personally, it's part of what continually reminds me you can be whatever it is you want to become. Like, you can become that thing. You can become this maximum version of yourself if you do listen to your gut and your intuition and what your body is telling you,
Yep.
and you work hard. Like, you do have to work hard. It's not
Yeah.
just going to happen. And I wonder for you, Travis, this is one of the questions that I had on my list. With all the different things that you've done with the podcast specifically, from where you started until now, what was your idea of what you wanted to achieve with the podcast, and where do you see it going now?
Well, I really enjoy the process, and I think that's really important. You kind of alluded to that. It's great for me to connect with other people. I enjoy doing the research. I love reading other people's books. I love doing it with my dad, and I told you this morning, Andrew. I mean, it was today in the Alzheimer's department. It wasn't a great fit for Dad to join, and I hope. Here we are at the end of 2022. I hope that Dad is with us for as many episodes as possible in 2023 and beyond, and we'll take that as it comes. But that's been a huge benefit of he loves having something on his calendar. He especially if we're talking with someone who he's known in the past, the conversations are very familiar to him. So that was definitely an original, an earlier goal that I will keep. And then as far as where else does it go, I don't know. I've definitely thought over the last. I'm almost a couple years in, like, oh boy, if I could push a button and this was kind of, my job or my main job, would I do that? Maybe. I really like. I love coaching athletes. Again, just because I back to sort of the impact or that second half of life sort of thing. I enjoy that. that part of my life as well. Um, so I guess the answer is like sometimes we see people and they've accomplished something and we think like, oh, they must have had a very clear goal and it must have been easy for them. And often neither of those things is true. It's usually not easy, and sometimes even the goal is not as clear. So, for now, it's just keep putting in the time. Keep putting out something that I'm proud of on a weekly basis, and where that goes as a business endeavor or sort of a main part of my job, who knows, we'll see.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes and what's next. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that would
thanks,
be
likewise.
fantastic if your aspiration or if something that feels right is that this becomes even more central to what you're
Hmm.
doing. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, you're on that path, right?
yeah, I think so, and it has, and it seems like that's the path that you're on as well. And maybe part of the rule is like, we do work, you work very hard at things, and sometimes the some of the outcome is out of your control, but that doesn't mean you don't keep putting in the hard work. Back, Andrew, to the systems thinking. You mentioned systems thinking and trauma. Are you familiar with IFS, or internal family systems? It's a I guess you'd call it a psychological model or framework. Have you ever read about that or explored it?
I've read about family systems theory because my mom gave me a book about it.
Oh, okay,
Uh,
nice.
I'm trying to remember when I read that. But yeah, I can't claim to have a deep level of expertise about it, but
Hmm.
it's one of the things that I've read about.
Yeah, I can't either, but the book that I was listening to this weekend, my son had a soccer tournament a few hours away, and so on the drive, he was sleeping, and I was listening to the audiobook. But the book is called No Bad Parts, and it's pretty interesting. Definitely taps into some of the stuff you had talked about before, and I would tell listeners to check out a on your podcast app. If you search Tim Ferriss IFS, it'll come up, and it's an interview that he did with the author, I think a few years ago, where the author actually goes through a sort of a therapy process with Ferris, using this IFS model. It's pretty interesting stuff, and it's helpful for, at least for me, it's been providing kind of a logical framework for thinking about how things are going on inside of me as far as different parts. Sometimes that can be challenging. I know for me, probably other people too. It's like, oh, you got all these different thoughts going on. What is sort of the true self? What are other things? What's an anxiety? Uh, you know, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I hear you say that, Travis, and thinking about some of the themes we've explored today, one of the other topics I find to be really interesting, and I'd be curious what your relationship with this is just the idea of presence. Because people often say, hey, the only thing you really have control over is your
Mm,
time, and that's the most valuable asset.
hmm.
Yes, that's true. And the quality of experience of your time and of your life and of anything that you do is your presence to what's happening
Mm.
and how you metabolize the experiences that you have. So I'm curious, how do you think about presence and how do you cultivate it?
I think it's really important. That for me, again, back to what are takeaways from like the world of athletics that we might be able to apply elsewhere. For me, that idea of presence, of showing up, of being, you know, as dialed in. I was going to say 100% in, but maybe it's not 100. Maybe it's just doing your best to be as present as you can, especially with other people around you. I think it's really really important. So do I have it mastered? Of course not. But am I intentional about it? Yeah, I am. Again, different things work for different people, but like for me, I do have a smartphone, but I don't have any notifications on it. So like I don't want my phone to buzz or shake or anything when something happens on Instagram or even a text message or something. Like for me, and again, maybe I'm dating myself, I don't think of texting as a form of synchronous communication. Like texting is a good thing for a brief check-in, and then someone gets back to it later, whether that's days later or hours later. But I think if you want to engage with someone, like talk to them, and we have video calls now, which is great. There's of course the good old phone call. Pick up the phone and talk to someone. So are there downsides of not having my phone vibrate when it gets a text or an email? Probably so, whereby maybe my response is not the time that someone is expecting, who kind of operates in a different a different system. But I think for me, the payoff of being more present with someone I'm talking to on a podcast, or probably most importantly, my wife and kids, or 15 minutes from now, I'm going to go meet my buddy and go out for a bike ride, and like we're going to be out biking, and I'll talk to him or not talk or suffer or whatever, but biking is what we're going to do. We're not going to do anything else.
Yeah, that's it sounds like you have a powerful relationship with presence, and that you've made it part of your practice of day-to-day life, not just with technology, but with whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I try. I think again, you probably know this as an athlete. Like one of the great things about sports is it like pulls you into the present, right? If you're doing Unbound or a cyclocross race or whatever, like you better be paying attention, because if not, you're going over the barriers, or bonking or crashing or whatever. So
Yeah, no, I think that you're 100% right about that. I also think, kind of going back to, and I know you're about to go on a bike ride, so I want to make sure you get out and
yeah,
get there on time. But one of the things that I've thought about a lot with endurance sports is it actually, if you take it too far, does it actually just become an addiction? Because you're right. The same
hmm,
thing can happen with meditation. I've talked to people
yeah,
who've had this happen with their meditation practice, where it's, why do I want to be in this state that I go into when I'm putting out a level of physical effort that makes it impossible for me to think about anything else? I know for me
yep,
personally, that's what I've enjoyed at times about, because I love training. I love the process of training and continual improvement. And I love what the physical experience of training does to my mental state,
yep,
which, as you noted, if you're doing certain things hard enough, you really can't think about anything else. But if you over index too far in that direction, then does it become escapism? And if so, then what are you not being present to in some other
yeah,
domain of your life?
yeah. Great questions. Yeah. I mean, I think again, back to the nuance and spectrum, like this is all a spectrum. Many things are mostly good, and maybe they reach a point of not being good, or they go back and forth. Something goes too far. I think there's, again, just anecdotally in my experience in knowing and working with a lot of endurance athletes, things like anxiety and depression. What's the relationship there? Are people seeking endurance sports to make those things feel better? Yes, maybe so for some people. Could they also, you overtrain? Well, that can generate anxiety and depression, or you get an injury and then your identity is so hooked into this one thing or activity. Then there's psychological challenges. Or you take someone who has been a self-identified addict, maybe it is drugs or alcohol or something, where we can typically agree, like an addiction there is, let's try to get rid of that if we can. Well, does the addiction shift to something else, whether it's the sport or the racing or the go yeah, who knows? All these, I'm super interested in this stuff, and will we ever know all the answers? Probably not. But yes, there's a lot of connection for sure. Andrew, I sure appreciate it, man. This has been fun. We should definitely do it again sometime. I only have one more question for you, and I'd love to ask you more questions next time, because I got a whole bunch more here. But this final one: is it true, Andrew, that exercise does not count if it is not uploaded to Strava?
exercise always counts. And I think sharing it with a community of like-minded individuals as you can on Strava can make it even more fun,
Yeah.
inspirational, and motivating. And I
Yep.
also think, hey, whatever people are doing, whatever they do to get out there and be active and go sweat, I think is awesome. And I support it wherever it happens.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm kind of of course I love Strava. I think it's a great platform as well. It's been fun to, see it grow obviously during your time, and then I think during the pandemic. I don't know the numbers, but all of a sudden I was getting all these emails. So and so's on Strava, and so it probably took off even more. But yes, I constantly remind my athletes when they forget their watch or phone or whatever, and oh man, Travis, there's no data in Training Peaks or Strava, and I'm like, you still went and exercised. Like, I don't care if the data's there or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that goes back to, I know that you're is a bit of a joke, and hey, like being flexible and adaptive, whatever
Yeah.
happens. I think
Yep.
that's a really good example,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Because I love leaderboards. There are a lot of aspects of Strava that I really enjoy getting to follow my friends who are around the world.
Yep.
My staying in touch with Spencer out in Boulder, who I do Beyond the Peloton podcast with, my buddy Eric, who's in Costa Rica,
Yep.
my buddy Matt, who's in Utah right now. Like, that's all awesome. And whatever, if I forget to hit start on my dog walk, it's okay.
Yep.
Right?
There you go.
Yeah.
Life goes on.
Awesome.
All right,
Yeah.
Andrew. Thanks again, man. Keep in touch. Really, really appreciate it. I'm glad that I can share your stuff with my listeners, and honored to get to hang out with yours as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Travis. Before we go, if anybody wants to check out my podcast, it's at choosethehardway.com.
Yep.
Search for Choose the Hard Way. You can find it through Google, and you can hit me at Vontz, that's VONTZ, on Twitter or Instagram, or at HardwayPod. And Travis, where can people find you?
Yeah, Travis Macy on Instagram. The podcast is called The Travis Macy Show. Website is travismacy.com. And is that the best, Andrew, if people are interested in you for, your business and or leadership consulting, is Twitter the best way for that? Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Twitter's great, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Sweet. Vontz, VONTZ. That's a great Twitter, name handle, I guess they call it.
I was there early.
Yeah. Good job.
Okay.
All right, man.
Have
Thanks
a great
again.
ride, Travis.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good one. Keep in touch.
Take care.
Yeah. See ya.